Okay, hello. So we're going to talk about DNA. We're going to address the following three questions. What is DNA? Where is it found? What does it do? Okay, so hopefully this infographic is helpful to you, and I'll just talk through all the main points. So we'll start off first of all with what DNA is, and this part of the diagram here. It's basically a code that codes for a set of instructions to produce yourself, really. It determines your eye color, your hair color, the tone of your skin, the shape of your nose, etc., etc. And also all those instructions, you want to think of them as a kind of an instruction manual with all various different pages, a page for your eye color, a page for your hair color, a page for your gender, etc., etc. Okay. Now all that information is basically stored in a molecule which we call DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And there's a diagram here on the left of what that molecule actually looks like. And you can see it's almost got this spiral staircase appearance to it. Now this is called the double helix. Okay, it's really important you use and remember that term double helix, because in the exam, you won't get away with things like a spiral or it's windy or something like that. You've got to use the correct terminology. So it's called a double helix. Okay. Now what you've got on the sides, a little bit like the sides of a ladder, is you've got this sugar phosphate backbone. So it's made up of a sugar and there's a phosphate molecule attached to it. Now this is the important bit. This is the code we were talking about before when we were talking about the book analogy. These coloured bands here are called bases. Okay, these are molecules, chemical molecules, and there are 4 of them that you find inside DNA. And you'll see there's like a bit of a colour code going on here, because some of them only pair up, 2 of them pair up, and then the other 2 pair up as well, and the others don't go together. Now it's this pairing up that determines the code. Okay, so think of it a little bit like the alphabet, where we've got A to Z, and then we can use the letters to make words, and we can use the words to make sentences, and then paragraphs, and then whole books. Okay, so the basic code starts with these 4 bases. But again, an analogy, I'm big on analogy because sometimes it helps certain students to remember certain shapes and terms. Is think of it just like the ladder. You've got the sides of the ladder, the bases, and then in the middle, the steps of the ladder, you've got the sides of the ladder, the sugar phosphate backbone, and then you've got the steps themselves, which are the bases. Okay. Now the 4 bases have a name. Sometimes we abbreviate them to their first letters, so A, T, G, and C. But it's important you know the names of the bases themselves, particularly in higher tier. So these bases are held together using strong hydrogen bonds. So the bonds exist between these molecules. So think of that as a little bit like a zip. Okay, so they can the bonds hold it together, like when you zip up a jacket or something like that. It's very, very strong connection. Now the base adenine and the base thymine, they pair up, so they're complementary to each other. And guanine and cytosine, they pair up as well. Now think of it a little bit like a jigsaw, where adenine has a specific shape and that kind of binds and connects with thymine, and guanine has a specific shape that then binds with cytosine. Okay, now the shape's really irrelevant. I'm just trying to show you that idea that adenine really only pairs up with thymine. You can see here that shape won't really match up with cytosine or guanine. Okay, so it only pairs with thymine, and guanine only pairs with cytosine. Okay, so just put up here, AT always pair up and GC always pair up. Okay, so again, that analogy, think of them like jigsaw pieces. Now, where do we find this DNA? Well, the DNA is actually found inside the nucleus of all the cells in your body. So any cell that has a nucleus, which is the vast majority, there is DNA. Okay, so maybe say apart from red blood cells, because they don't have a nucleus. So here's a typical animal cell. You've got the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, where you'd find the ribosomes and the mitochondria, and then you've got this dark, dense area called the nucleus. Okay. Now the reason why it's dark and dense is because compressed within inside, condensed inside, is a lot of information. Okay. You've actually got structures called chromosomes. Now we'll come back to chromosomes and genes in the next video. Okay. But basically, a chromosome is just a structure that houses the DNA. So you've got the chromosome here. Now sometimes you find them as single strands, and sometimes you see them paired up, almost like these bow ties, these crosses here. Okay, and the DNA is tightly coiled up into individual sections. Now the sections here are called genes, and those genes are made of the DNA. So the DNA is the smaller structure. They make genes. The genes then along the chromosome make the chromosome, and then the chromosomes are tightly packed within the nucleus, which is then part of the cell. So sometimes you get questions where it looks at the size of these structures, which is the biggest, which is the smallest. So it's important that you understand here that the cell is the biggest structure and the DNA here is the smallest structure. Okay, and of course, hopefully you know that genes control things like your eye colour and your hair colour, like we discussed before. So what is DNA? We've discussed it's a code, it's a chemical molecule made up of various different structures. Where is it found? It's found inside the nucleus of the cells. And what does it do? It contains genes, it's used to build and make genes that control your various features like your eye colour and your hair colour.